Hello, my name is Brittany. Today I'm going to be talking to you guys, as Nicholas said, about virtual reality in the medical world. Before I get started, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm from the United States in Los Angeles, California. I received a bachelor's degree in public health 2 years ago, and since then I've been learning how to make my own full-stack applications, programming primarily in Ruby and JavaScript this whole time. A little bit about my hobbies. I'm a long-distance runner. I like to dance. Yeah, that's it. Okay. So today I'm going to be covering how VR can be used to assist with mental health diagnoses, as well as in pain reduction, paying special attention to burn victims and amputees. I'm also going to be discussing how VR is being used to treat post-traumatic stress disorder, in addition to a few other less severe anxiety disorders. And then I'm going to wrap it up with a demo of a React 360 VR app, which I built that's designed to help you overcome some common phobias like fear of driving, public speaking, and heights. Okay, so to begin, a quick introduction as to how VR can help with mental health diagnosis. Like, how is this even related? VR gives psychiatrists the ability to observe their patients in a wide range of virtual environments, and they're able to make observations about a patient's behaviors and physiological reactions to various stimuli. So this provides standardization, which also decreases the subjectivity of mental health diagnoses, which is a problem. And on the flip side of that, there's also some flexibility. So a VR environment can be customized and adjusted to suit an individual patient's needs. So for example, if an environment may be used too triggering for a certain individual, that can be adjusted. There's that strength of flexibility there. So an example of this in the real world, this is actually an image from a virtual environment that was designed at the University of Cambridge as part of a study to help detect early stages of Alzheimer's. So this is a game. It's like a navigation game, and all the participants in this study are wearing a VR headset, and they have to follow these cones, and it ends up taking them in an L-shaped path. And so when they turn around, this is what they see. The cones are gone, and their task is to retrace their steps in that same L-shaped path. And poor performance in this task is indicative that maybe you have an early stage of Alzheimer's. And a little bit about this study, it was led by Dr. Dennis Chan at Cambridge's Department of Clinical Neurosciences. They're using an HTC Vive headset. And the study is actually still underway for another year and a half, just so that they can collect a larger sample size to, ensure the accuracy of their results. They have published some preliminary findings, which are very promising, and they've discovered that this is actually more accurate at detecting early stages of Alzheimer's than the more traditional cognitive tests that are currently used, like figure recall, which would be like being seen a series of images and having to recall if you've seen one before. Like a symbol test would be something like having to solve a puzzle where there's corresponding symbols with numbers and having to decipher that. So those are the more traditional ways of detecting Alzheimer's in its early stages. But the findings of this study lead us to be optimistic about the potential of VR and playing a bigger role in diagnosing mental disorders as the gear becomes cheaper and easier to use. So this is another virtual environment that was developed in Germany at the University of Regensburg. And they're using this environment to test the suitability of VR for diagnosing social anxiety disorder. So this is a virtual waiting room. And in the study, they were comparing two different groups of people. People who scored low on a scale of social anxiety and people who scored high. And they're comparing their results to see, will this be consistent with their social anxiety? So each participant had a task where they entered this environment and they had to approach the clerk, make eye contact, and ask for a seat. And they would end up being rejected for their seat because there are none left. And so all of the participants were asked to report their expected fear before beginning the task. And then after the task was over, they reported their actual fear experience. And throughout the study, they were actually tracking all of their eye movements. So that's where you see some interesting data. Maybe limitation of the study is that these 3D models, I think, are a little scary regardless of whether you have social anxiety. But the findings are still significant. They do see a difference. So the dark gray is the highly anxious group. Light gray is the lowly anxious group. So definitely a huge disparity in reported fear before and after. And so this is their eye movements. So you can see that the low anxious group was more likely to direct their eye contact at the face of the 3D model and less likely to direct their eye contact at the body or in the outside environment, which might, reflect how these people would interact with other individuals on a daily basis. And so they used another virtual environment that was just interacting with one person. This is like a virtual train. They had to also make eye contact. That was a part of the task. And they were asked to perform a basic calculation question. We asked them a simple arithmetic question, and they had to make eye contact and answer it. As you can expect, the relationship between the two groups' data in this environment is similar as the other one. So you see the consistent difference between expected and actually experienced fear. And then also, again, the highly anxious group is less likely to make eye contact with the face and more likely to direct their gaze at the body, the 3D model, and at the outside environment. This one was interesting in that both groups actually had a very high rate of directing their eye contact in the environment. So overall, they did conclude this study that being able to track eye movements in VR is a very good and helpful indicator when diagnosing social anxiety disorder in the future. Okay, so now I'm going to move on and talk about how VR can be used to reduce your pain. So there is a huge psychological component of pain, as I'm sure some of you can imagine, and this is the aspect of pain that VR does have the potential to reduce. So this is accomplished by creating a distraction for your mind via a VR environment. And when you do that, you're subsequently able to direct less attention towards processing the neural signals that are coming from the pain receptors in your brain. And so it's important to note that VR, thus far at least, is being used as a complement rather than as a substitute for traditional pain medication. So this means that if an individual patient doesn't see any real benefit, no reduction in his pain from VR, they're really no worse off. So the risk here is very minimal, which is a big deal when it comes to other pain reduction methods. But again, on the flip side of that, if an individual is noted to respond particularly well to VR in reducing their pain, or if a specific demographic with a certain treatment in a VR room, it is seen to be more successful, this can lead to a reduction in dependency on opioid medication. Okay, so on the bottom left, we see an image of a VR environment. It's actually a game, and it's called Snow World. And it was developed at the University of Washington, designed specifically for burn victims to play during their wound treatments. So a little bit of background about these wound treatments. Burn victims have to have these treatments every single day, and they're very excruciating because it actually involves the stretching of their skin. And because it does happen every day, they can't really receive any other stronger pain medications because of that. So they can't go under, for example. So this is really important. And so here's an image of the game of Snow World. It basically just involves throwing snowballs at the snowmen and at the penguins before they can throw them at you. And it's also playing a Paul Simon song in the background. It's I don't know, I think just the researcher liked Paul Simon. And the Arctic setting was a very deliberate decision. So they did use this Arctic environment to provide a mental juxtaposition to fire. So to distract their mind and have them not only engage in playing a game and in listening to some happy music, but also to be thinking about ice as they're receiving treatments for their burn wounds. So about this study, it was led by Dr. G. Hoffman at the Virtual Reality and Analgesia Research Center, which is cool that there is such a thing, at the University of Washington. And their patients actually reported a 35 to 50% reduction in procedural pain. And to make sure to account for any subjectivity in the patient reportings, they spent 2 years developing a special VR headset, which could be worn inside of an MRI. And so they did the same study 2 years later, having the patients actually go inside an fMRI, where they're able to collect data from brain scans and prove that there is indeed a reduction in pain-related brain activity. So here's a photo of one of the patients receiving her wound treatment while playing the game. You'll notice here there's actually a robotic arm holding up the headset to her face. This is in case it's a sensitive skin area for one of the patients to avoid putting any pressure on the skin on their face, how a VR headset would. And so she's playing the game by clicking the mouse and it's able to rotate there with her finger. Okay, so next I'm going to discuss how VR is also being used to reduce the pain experienced by amputees. But before I begin, let me experience this phenomenon called phantom limb. So phantom limb, which is also referred to as PL, is experienced by well over half of all amputees. So it's like fairly common. And it is the sensation that a missing limb is still present. So unfortunately, more often than not, the sensation is very painful, and this is called phantom limb pain, PLP. It manifests in all different types of forms, but it's often described as burning or like a squeezing, shooting, stabbing sensation, cramping. Sounds pretty terrible. So there's actually no common consensus about what causes PLP, phantom limb pain, PLP. But there has been success in treating it, and that is usually accomplished via visual treatments, the creation of visual illusions, which can actually trick our brain into evoking some type of kinesthetic sensation in a missing limb. So this is a mirror box. This was developed in the 1990s to treat phantom limb pain. So in this example, this would maybe be a diagram of somebody with a amputated right arm or right hand. And if they're experiencing pain, they can use this mirror here to create this illusion that the limb is still there. And that is not only able to help reduce the pain, but can also help train your brain that it is missing. So here's an example of some like a pseudo mirror box using for someone with an amputated leg. Obviously, this illusion isn't very realistic. It's not really fooling anybody. But it is overall very successful. But of course, not everyone sees improvements from this type of mirroring treatment. But you can create a much more immersive effect with VR. And that is being developed. And the really cool thing about simulating something like this with VR is that you can actually isolate the movement of your limbs with the assistance of other more advanced technology that I'll talk about soon, instead of just mirroring the existing limb. Okay, so this is a study that was conducted at the University of Pennsylvania's medical school. So they're using an Oculus Rift DK2 headset. And they actually have inertial measurement units here mounted onto an Arduino board. IMU's inertial measurement units are just like small electronic devices. They measure and can report a body's specific movement force and also the angular rate. And so we have 3 different VR games here that they developed for this study. One of them is playing chess, in which you can actually pick things up. And the second one is a game that involves walking and running through an environment. And the third one is typing at a computer, navigating a web browser. And so, they're using Arduino microcontrollers to send readings from the IMUs to a computer, and then Unity scripts are filtering those readings. All these games are pretty simple, but it's amazing. So in this picture, we have somebody with an amputated left leg, and through the IMU's detections, maybe here in their upper thigh, they're able to create this illusion that mirrors the readings from the IMUs, and they could walk and run through this environment, which has been tremendous in helping them reduce their phantom limb pain. So unfortunately, this study only had 2 participants to report data from. So the dark circles is one patient, the gray squares is another one. And so they had 4 different hour-long sessions, and they reported their pain at the beginning of the session and also at the end of the hour. So you can see a really dramatic decrease in pain, almost always completely to 0 at the end of the hour of playing these games. And also, what's fantastic is there's an overall decrease in the initial pain as well. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about how VR is being used to treat patients with PTSD. Before I get into that, I'll just provide a brief introduction to this illness for anyone who isn't familiar with it. So PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. It is caused by experiencing or witnessing something very terrifying, and some common symptoms of it involve flashbacks of that traumatic event, intense physiological and emotional reactions to anything that might resemble that event, avoidance behavior, again, to anything that might resemble that event or trigger memories of that event, emotional numbing, and irritability. And it is most often seen in war veterans, survivors of a terrorist attack, and victims of sexual assault. So the most effective way to treat PTSD is called prolonged exposure therapy. So this was also developed at UPenn by a famous psychologist, Dr. Edna Foa. And it involves exposing a patient very gradually to the stimuli that do activate their strong responses. And so via this gradual exposure, a patient is actually able to learn how to confront that trauma and learn how to deal with and manage those undesired responses. And so once they're able to do this, then, those symptoms from the previous slide are reduced. And so maybe you're wondering what all this has to do with VR. Well, a large part of prolonged exposure therapy is dependent upon a patient's ability to imagine. It's really dependent on their imagination. There's a lot of exercises that involve reliving a certain memory and reliving these traumatic events, which is a lot to ask for. It's a lot to ask of a PTSD patients to relive these types of things, especially when one of the main symptoms is avoidance behavior. And also PTSD is highly correlated with depression. And obviously, it's impossible for a psychologist to standardize or control the patient's imagination. So this is where VR can step in and really revolutionize the way that this exposure is given. And there are people working on that already. So this is BraveMind. This is a VR game that was designed specifically to treat the PTSD experienced by veterans in the United States with combat-related PTSD. And this develops at the University of Southern California's Institute of Creative Technologies by Dr. Skip Rizzo. And it works pretty much the same way as more conventional prolonged exposure therapy, in that the exposure to the stimuli is very gradual, right? They don't just throw someone into a combat scene. So, for example, this would be an example of a first introductory steps. This is just a scene that is designed. This is from BraveMind, and it's designed to look like a street in either Afghanistan or Iraq, which are the countries that the patients did experience combat. There's nothing really intense or violent going on here. And once a patient is able to stop having strong emotional, physiological reactions to a scene like this, they would then move on gradually to scenes of greater intensity. And they're always under clinical care, by the way. This is something that it's not a video game that you can play at home. So maybe you'd move on to something like this, where you see a soldier, a gun, again, really no violence happening. And then something like this, and it goes on and begins to resemble something that looks like Call of Duty a bit. But as I mentioned, this is designed specifically for its medical purpose, and there's no way to access this game unless you're a patient of Dr. Rizzo or you know him really well. But sorry to the gamers. And this philosophy of VR exposure therapy can also be used to treat much less severe anxiety disorders. So this is my disclaimer slide. That my next slide has a picture of a big virtual spider. So I'll talk about it now in case that bothers anybody. So an example of a less severe anxiety disorder would be arachnophobia, or the intense fear of spiders. And so there are actually a number of VR games, some of them you can just play online, that are designed to gradually expose you to virtual spiders and help you to overcome this fear. And it was actually the lab at the University of Washington, the same lab that designed snow worlds for burn victims, that also created a really cool study that involved, a spider being really small and far away in a kitchen, and then suddenly, and by the end, it's like really big in front of your face. And they even had like a fake spider model that you could reach out and touch to feel like you're touching the real thing. And there were some people after that study, and mind you, these were all people that had very intense arachnophobia, like a very strong, irrational fear of spiders. And some of them were even able to touch a real tarantula after. So I'm going to change the slide now, so close your eyes if you want. So here's a picture of someone reaching out. They would be looking at something like this. And there's a few versions of stuff like this. Here's a more cute one. It's actually a game called Bitsy. And you play a game with this spider, and as you progress through the game, the 3D model becomes more and more realistic looking. So it starts off as this very cute, cartoonish, friendly looking spider. And by the end of the game, when you're on level of, 10 or 20 or so, it's like a very realistic looking tarantula in front of you. And this game is actually developed by Samsung in partner with a Swedish startup called Mimmerse. And this is actually the inspiration behind my application. There's no spiders. But so I do design an app using React 360, which is built right on top of React. It's very similar to React Native, if you're familiar with that. And it's managed by Facebook and Oculus. And so I create these illusions via 360-degree videos. I actually rented this camera for a few days and went around Shibuya capturing some footage. So I captured 360 video of driving through Shibuya, riding the giant Ferris wheel in Odaiba inside the 360 glass gondolas that they have. And I also filmed a video over there in this room of having a bunch of people staring at you, how you're doing to me right now. I'll go ahead and show you that now. So this is the screen that you see, and actually the way that you select these things. So right here, heights, drive, public speaking, these are all buttons, but you see I can't actually click them with my mouse. These are gaze buttons. And the way that you select these things are by hovering over them with your gaze. And there's a countdown of 2,000 milliseconds. And when that countdown finishes, while the gaze is fixed over the button, you can enter. So the gaze is used with a raycaster, which is centered in the middle of the screen. So if we bring this over, so you can see that white dot here, right? So if we center this over something, let's go into public speaking, you see a countdown. And now, this is Yan and Frank. Also, I don't recommend using this camera, the same camera that I use to build your own VR applications. Spend some more money and you'll have a far more superior product. You can do a full 360 turn. Okay. Takes a while. That's the whiteboard. And if we want to go back to the main menu, we would just hover over the home button, the same as before. We have to get it in the middle. Okay, so yeah, we can go into heights. This is the Ferris wheel. It is slowly moving. You can see the floor is glass as well. Well, that's the tripod and my feet. Because, yeah, I'm in this video. And yeah. And we can go back. And the last one is driving. So you can overcome your fear of making a right turn in Tokyo, which I am afraid of. It's scary for people that come from a country, especially that drives on the left side of the road. But yeah, that's my app. Each video is about 2 minutes long, and they will loop forever. And yeah, these are the sources from all the research studies that I presented to you today. So if you're interested in learning more about this, when this is uploaded on YouTube, you can refer to this. And thank you. Here's the demo QR code. Thank you for listening. That's all.